It is, and we're recording. So, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Today, we are going to be talking about establishing professional boundaries and linking that in with people in positions of trust. Some quick introductions for everyone. So, my name is Liz Langson. I am the Safeguarding Adults Board Manager for North Somerset. And joined with me today is Ruth Spears. Ruth, do you want to just introduce yourself and your role?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ruth Spears. I'm a professional development lead for adult social work here at North Somerset Council.
Thank you. And James Wright.
Hello, everybody. My name's James Wright. I'm Safeguarding Adults Manager here in North Somerset Council. So I'm responsible for the day-to-day operational management of our safeguarding team.
Thank you, James. Okay, we're going to get started. So this is where we test my skills on how to navigate the PowerPoint. Here we go. So today, our introduction, aims and purpose. We are going to be looking at professional boundaries, going back to basics a little bit. What are they, etc. We'll then look at the person in a position of trust, at the law and statutory guidance, which Ruth will take us through. Ruth will also take us through around the framework and key principles. And then we'll come over to James, who's going to give us some good case examples and how we might apply person in a position of trust and bringing it all together into real life examples for you all. I will just quickly run through some basics before I continue. So again, thank you for coming, everyone, and welcome on behalf of all of the 5 Safeguarding Adults boards. We've got a great turnout today with lots of people. If I could ask everyone to keep their cameras and microphones off for the session, it just helps with that many people in the room, just stops any sort of clunkiness. That would be great. We'd welcome any questions for the speakers. If you would please use the chat function to do this, that'd be really helpful, as there are a few too many of us putting hands up, coming off mute, etc. So anything you do right in the chat will be visible to everyone, and we'll try and monitor it as we go. There's an option in Teams to use live captions and subtitles, and these can be switched on by each individual user. Only you'll be able to see those captions. They don't appear for the whole group. Just to let everyone know that the session is being recorded, and a link to all the recordings are going to be made available over the next few weeks through Bristol's Keeping Bristol Safe Partnership website. And your local Safeguarding Adults boards will also have the links sent out to them, so we'll send them out to everyone. There is an evaluation form at the end of the session, which I'll just put a link in the chat to towards the end. If I could ask that everyone just kindly fills that out, it's much appreciated. It only takes a few moments. Okay. So, language. So just a very quick one for everyone. So when we are talking today about PIPOT, P-I-P-O-T, that stands for a person in a position of trust. And that is when people are working with adults. When people work with children, we talk about local authority designated officers, and that's called a LADO. So just a little bit of terminology there for people just to understand when we're talking about the difference between adults and children. But again, any questions, please do ask us. Okay. So I'm going to just talk about how to maintain professional boundaries and what not to do. Now, some of this might go back to basics a little bit for everyone, but we felt it would just be really helpful to do that. So professional boundaries are about not being friends with someone, but being friendly, displaying and maintaining your organisation's or registered body's values. Understanding of what constitutes ethical and professional behaviour, being aware of codes of conduct within your organisations, having an awareness of the impact of your actions and interactions with the adult you work with. following your organisation's policies and procedures and knowing where to find them and where they are. Protecting yourself from situations that can lead to allegations being made. Not going beyond the remit of your role. Not giving out any personal information to adults you are working with, such as your address or mobile number or anything which can link you personally. Not having an adult at risk or their friends or family members on social media. Not becoming emotionally over-involved or involved in a sexual or intimate relationship with adults that you are working with. Not to lend, borrow or give money or other items such as cigarettes, alcohol or illicit substances. Not to accept inappropriate gifts or bribes or inappropriate hospitality. And again, that comes down to knowing your own individual organisation's expectations. So professional boundaries outside of work. So when you're not at work, you are at all times still a person in a position of trust, which is where we spoke about the term PIPOT. It's important to also remember that the behaviour outside of work, including online, can reflect on a staff member's role and organisation. You should never post anything that could be deemed as offensive, such as abusive comments that can be seen as inappropriate language, online bullying or hate speech. You should never post any details of an adult that you're working with, discussions or images on their social media accounts. Personal social media accounts are not an appropriate platform for contact with adults you are working with. If they do attempt to contact you through this channel, they should be advised of more appropriate ways. Remember that almost everything posted online can be copied and shared, and even with private social media accounts. So some basics there really, and things that most people do know, but it's always good just to have a little refresh and just come back to them in that sort of format. So I'm going to hand over to Ruth, and Ruth's going to talk to us about PIPOT, the law, the statutory guidance, and how those professional boundaries then link to this. Thank you, Ruth.
Liz. So we've talked about professional boundaries. Liz has just covered those. I'm now going to move us on to discuss PIPOT. Now, we know that PIPOT stands for people in a position of trust. But let's have a think about what that actually means, okay? So when we think about safeguarding adults' work, we know that the focus is to safeguard one or more identified adults with care and support needs who meet the statutory criteria. However, there are occasions when actually incidents are reported or information is shared that do not involve an adult at risk specifically, but actually indicate that a general risk may be posed to adults with care and support needs by a person in a position of trust. So PIPOT is about addressing that gap. PIPOT relates to instances where an organisation or a local authority is alerted to information that may affect the kind of suitability of a professional or a volunteer, and that's important to note, to work with an adult or an adult with care and support needs. Now, that information could originate from an activity from within their professional or volunteering role or outside of that role, okay? Liz has already touched on this, but it's really important to note here the difference between duties under LADO, so the local authority designated officer, and PIPOT. So when a person's conduct towards a child may impact on their suitability to work with or continue to work with children, this must be referred to the LADO or the local authority's designated officer. I think it's also worth reiterating that obviously if concerns meet the statutory safeguarding criteria, which we know is section 42(1) of the Care Act, duties under section 42 of the Care Act need to be adhered to. So just don't forget about those two. And lastly, before I move on to the next slide, the Care Act guidance actually says that organisations should have clear policies for dealing with allegations against people who work in a paid or unpaid capacity with adults with care and support needs. And actually that those policies should make a clear distinction between an allegation, a concern about quality of care, or a complaint. And what I'll do is in a few slides time, I'll talk a little bit more about the policy side of things. Next slide, please, Liz. Can't actually see the slides, so I'm hoping that it's there. Okay, so we've briefly touched on it, but actually, who does the PIPOT framework apply to? So you can all see it there. It's all who work either in a paid or unpaid capacity, either as a member of staff, student, volunteer, with adults with care and support needs. A member of staff, student or volunteer is considered to be in a position of trust. And any allegation against them concerning behaviours which could indicate a potential risk towards adults and or children, either in employment or in their personal life, must be carefully considered. That last bit is quite important. Remember that this refers to a person's conduct in both their personal and their professional life. Okay. Concerns arise when a person in a position of trust has maybe behaved in a way that has harmed or may have harmed an adult or a child. Now, remember here that an adult may not have care and support needs or so therefore not meet the statutory safeguarding criteria. So therefore might not be dealt with under safeguarding, but we've still got a concern there about their behaviour. They may possibly have committed a criminal offence against or related to an adult or a child, or they've behaved towards an adult or a child in a way that indicates they may pose a risk of harm to adults with care and support needs. Next slide, please, Liz.
We're on key principles now, Ruth.
Thank you. So there's a few takeaways from today. You should now have an awareness of what PIPOT is. One thing that I really want to stress is that each organisation will have their own policy in relation to PIPOT. And there is quite a large spectrum of ways in which different local authorities respond to PIPOT. So please familiarise yourself with your organisation's PIPOT policy. Organisations should have clear procedures in place, setting out process, timescales for investigation, and actually what support and advice might be available for somebody who is where allegations are made against them. Ultimately, local authorities want to feel satisfied that employers or voluntary organisations are provided with information that enables them to adequately risk assess, adequately risk manage. But we do need to think carefully about what information is shared. And I don't want to get too far into individual approaches by different local authorities, as we've got representatives here from all over the Avon and Somerset area. Some local authorities want oversight of all PIPOT concerns and almost take kind of a pseudo safeguarding response. Whereas some local authorities take the approach that actually, if the employer has got all the information they need, it's their responsibility to risk manage, and therefore the local authority doesn't need to be involved or even notified. So you can see there's a range of approaches here to PIPOT. So once again, please go and read your own policy. That's my main message from today. I'm going to hand over to James now, who can provide some PIPOT case examples.
Thanks, Ruth.
Yeah.
Sorry, James. I was just going to say, just for everybody, everybody's policy is at the end of the presentation. So all the individual local areas, we've got all those details for you to take away today as well, so you can look at your own area. And that's towards the end of the slide. James, thank you.
Thank you. Very pretty. Right. Thank you very much. So the first thing that I would say is just to reiterate a couple of things that Ruth has said there is that excuse me, the person in a position of trust frameworks exist because the Care Act tells safeguarding adults boards that they must have that framework in place, and they don't give any real further guidance than that. So you do then see this range of approaches. The reason that it exists is because Section 42 inquiries and duties under Section 42 to investigate allegations of abuse of people with care and support needs already exist. But there's a gap there. There's a gap between allegations of acts against a person with care and support needs and other behaviours that a person in a position of trust might display that give rise to concerns about their suitability. So there's a gap there, and that's what the PIPOT framework is intended to fill. So I have some examples here of how we have applied our PIPOT duties in North Somerset. So again, bearing in mind this is examples of our specific approach. Can you just bring the next section up, Liz? Thank you. Okay, so a little while ago, we were informed in the council that a young woman, she was 18 or 19 years old, had a history of being reported as the perpetrator of domestic abuse, but no criminal prosecution had been made. The partner or partners had never proceeded, but that was reported to us as a concern in terms of this young person's suitability to work in what was a junior carer role, a carer apprenticeship. So what did we do with that? Well, the first thing is, of course, we don't exist to immediately ruin a young person's career or future, but had to look at this sensitively and look at it through the eyes of risk management. So what is the degree of risk? What information needs to be shared? And can we assure ourselves that that risk can be managed? Of course, we had to think about issues around information sharing and data protection. So the way that we went about that is that we felt that a key partner in this decision was the police. So we consulted with the safeguarding unit in the police to establish what history and information they had and to help us to get a perspective around how concerned we were. The next thing that we decided to do was actually to consult with the young woman herself. I went out and visited her and sat down and said, pretty much as I've said to you, that we did have some concerns. We certainly didn't want to ruin her opportunities as a young person, but that we did feel that this needed to be risk managed. And the best way of going about that was for her to have a conversation with her employer. So she agreed to do that. A few days later, I contacted the care home manager and I checked that the young woman had made a disclosure. The manager advised me that she had, and that they had put a risk assessment and risk management plan in place, and that young person then continued with their apprenticeship. So I think that's that's our first example. So any questions or comments on that, do put them in the chat, and Liz or Ruth will prompt me. Otherwise, I'll move on to our second example. So we were informed by a person's neighbour. Somebody got in touch with us to say, I'm pretty sure my neighbour works as a support worker, and I'm really concerned about the material that they're posting on Facebook, the racist material that they are posting. Um, so we consulted with the police, who had to look at the material and said that they were concerned enough that they thought the employer should be informed. So we took action directly in that case and contacted the employer and asked that they had a look at this person's online presence, their social media accounts, which they did, and made the decision themselves to subsequently dismiss that support worker and to refer them to DBS. This relates very much, I think, to the message that Liz gave earlier around always being a person in a position of trust, always having responsibilities to your registered body and your registered professionals, your registered professions values, and also always representing your organisation and its values. Thank you, Liz. Okay, so the last example that we have here is relatively recent. We had two PIPOT concerns raised to us concerning a support worker who had become subject to child protection proceedings. One contact was from Children's Social Care to advise us they had very serious concerns about this person's parenting, and they were aware that they worked as a support worker in a position of trust. And the other came from the support worker's employer because he had made a disclosure to his employer. So what did we do? We checked with the employer what information had been disclosed to him, and we cross-referenced that with the detail from social care, the children's social care. And we decided that the employer had been given enough information that the disclosure was adequate. We then followed up with the employer in terms of what actions they were going to take. They agreed to suspend the individual subject to a far more detailed risk assessment, and also to inform the DBS that they had done so. Our role in this then was to we waited for the outcome of the risk assessment, and the employer did actually make the decision for this person to return to work. So we asked just to see a copy of that risk assessment and management plan, and to look at how that was going to be managed, and satisfied ourselves that that was appropriate. Not that we have any particular powers, but we can be that sort of critical friend. Then we drew our PIPOT involvement to a close because we made the decision that the employer had a line of communication with Children's Social Care, so as the investigation continued, and we were satisfied that they had had enough information in order for them to undertake their own risk assessments and put their own management plan in place. So the key message there really is around how North Somerset approaches its PIPOT duties, and what we're looking for is to we boil down the duties to that of there's information of concern about an employee. Does the employer have adequate information in order to assess and manage risk, and are we satisfied that they have done so or are doing so? And once we've got to that point, then we tend to close our involvement. What you'll find in other areas is that it may be taken up more as a safeguarding process with a set of meetings and reviews as the investigation continues. or indeed I have seen areas in the country, particularly one area of the country, where the Safeguarding Adults Board took the decision to write out to all its partners to say, you must have a process in place for how you manage this. So you can see the spectrum is really quite broad across the country. But I hope that gives you an example of how we do it locally and some of the issues that you should be considering. So thank you, Liz.
Thanks, James. And I guess although, like you say, it is a very wide spectrum and people do apply that differently, it's the Care Act 2014 did bring it into the guidance, and that is how different local authorities have sort of embedded it. There's no one way fits all, and people have interpreted it and worked with it in the way they feels best. But its principles are still very sort of they're at the core, aren't they, James, of the purpose of it?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much for those case examples. It helps just bring that alive a little bit, just to see what you and your team deal with when you get those concerns in.
Yeah.
So on our slides, we've got, and I'll pop them in the chat as well, we've got the links to each 5 Safeguarding Adults Board's policies. So it would be recommended that if it is something that you're interested in or you want to understand how your area does it more, then to have a little look at your policies. So we've got Baines, Somerset, Bristol and South Gloss and North Somerset's policies here. Yeah, so have we got any questions from anyone in the room? Is there anything that anybody would like to talk about? Anybody want to come off mute or raise your hand? Any questions for James or Ruth or myself? Around the safeguarding. Luke, do you want to?
Yeah, hi. It's Luke Lyons from Avon Fire and Rescue. This is slightly off topic, but as we've got you all here, it's quite interesting. We do a lot of referrals into awful organisations, and some organisations are better at getting back with feedback of what's happened on a safeguarding referral or alert concern or a concern that our crews have had, and some aren't. Is there a particular reason around that? It seems to have got worse over the last couple of months. Has something changed within the councils? Do you know?
I think that's it. Luke, speaking solely on behalf of North Somerset, this is something of a perennial issue. The notion of feeding back to referrers. So it's difficult to speak on behalf of other authorities. What I would hope that you'll see from North Somerset is, in fact, an improved response in terms of feedback, since we've made some fundamental changes to our to the way that we work with safeguarding, in that all safeguarding concerns, once we treat them as a safeguarding concern, once they come to my team, we now have a strict process for feeding back. I think the trouble is that we make a decision right at the front end when they're received at Care Connect. Care Connect will make a decision. Is this about welfare or is this about protection from abuse and neglect for the purpose of safeguarding? So I can be confident that feedback around safeguarding concerns should have improved from North Somerset. The challenge becomes more if they go down a welfare route, because it goes into a much higher turnover, quicker paced process. That said, that is something that we're actively working on. It's a politician's answer, I'm afraid, Luke. We know it's an issue.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for that. You've been honest there. And I think, yeah, to be fair, from a safeguarding point of view, you are spot on. It is more around concerns of care and neglect that we really do struggle getting feedback from, and basically being told that we haven't got consent, even though that we've got consent from the person to feed them into you, and we've provided all the information. So that's just feedback from us, and I know I'm not alone on that when I speak to other organisations. So
thank you, Luke. Luke, did you say you're from Avon's Fire?
Avon Fire and Rescue, yeah.
Yeah, that was it, yeah. Luke,
Thank
what
you.
might be helpful is, so Megan Elvin sits on the Safeguarding Adults Board in North Somerset
Yes.
from your
Yeah.
organisation. It might
Yeah,
just be
she's aware of
worth,
it.
yeah, it might be worth feeding back to her, and then she could escalate it through the board, and we can have a wider conversation.
Yeah,
So
that's
that
cool.
might be an option there if you're happy to do that.
No, I've done that as well.
Okay, perfect. Yeah,
Right.
I'll let Megan know that I'm happy to have a chat about it.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay, we've got a comment in the chat here, and we've got a hand up. So I'll just come to the comment before the hand. So the scenario with the young woman who was to be an apprentice care assistant. In this case, she chose to disclose to her employer, enabling a risk assessment and risk management plan. What would have been the next step if she had not agreed to disclose this? No specific reason, just interested.
Yeah. Absolutely good question. And the reality is we would have shared the information. What we're doing in this situation was a good example of us following data protection principles, where we would say to the subject, if you like, that we are considering sharing information about them. But they might choose to share that information themselves first. But if they didn't, then we feel that we would have grounds to share it without their consent. So it's just following the data protection principles, really. But I think because of the level of risk, we would have decided to share without her permission.
Lovely. Thanks, James. And we've got a hand up from Amanda. Amanda, do you want to come in?
Yeah, hi, thank you. I'm from Somerset Health Safeguarding. I guess I'm just interested, for me, it's around, it links to that last question, I guess, in terms of when it's an allegation and when there's, and I appreciate that there, with this particular young person, was there a lot of evidence of, even though they haven't been criminalised, was there a lot of evidence to support that this is potentially true? Because it just feels it can be interpreted different ways, can't it? And I've certainly come across with the Lado where it's allegations of domestic abuse and they haven't been overly interested in terms of the transferable risk either, when it's someone they know. So I'm just interested really how you make that decision when there's no actual criminal record.
Yeah, absolutely. So of course, what we did not do is simply respond to that first contact and make our decision based on that. We worked with the police to assess what information did they have. Did it reflect this picture of concern? And the evidence really suggested that there was a picture across several relationships that suggested a chronic risk from this person.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. We haven't got any more comments in the chat or any more hands. So is there anything else from anyone? Any forms of discussion? Happy to kind of have it as an open conversation if people want to sort of just talk about any of the cases, any of their experiences. Julia, would you like to come in?
Hi, yeah. So I'm from Somerset as well, but I'm a designate nurse for safeguarding adults, and it's just interesting that across the southwest region there's quite a lot of ongoing conversation about PIPOT and the inconsistency in approach, because there is a lack of real strong national guidance or legislative requirements, and essentially it falls down to the local authority taking a lead more often than not with no additional funding. So the LADO is a very well established process because there's money and a lot more history behind the requirement and need. And I think the just reflecting on it, I think it's frustrating, and I hear what the guy from, I think, the fire service was saying, particularly when you're having to deal with different local authorities and different approaches to process. and the robustness, because ultimately, you know, we have to seek the local authority has to seek assurance that organisations are managing allegations made against their staff robustly. That's essentially it. And I suppose it's about how you seek that assurance when there isn't a funded person in a position to maintain that. And also there's the issue about GDPR and what information you hold about external agencies, staff members, etc. So it's a real balance, and it's
Yes.
I'm just reflecting. I'm not bringing anything new. I'm just saying that, you know, certainly from a southwest region, that there is some work being undertaken at the moment to sort of look at the different policies that are held by local authorities in the southwest region, and see whether there's anything that we can do to sort of share good practice, etc., and maybe even try and standardize a little bit more our approach, so that particularly for those agencies that work across multiple local authorities, it's not so confusing or inconsistent in the response and approach that they have to deal with. So just feeding that back, really.
I think that's really most helpful, Julia. Thank you. And I agree with everything you said there. I'm aware that we've submitted our policy into the ADAS group that are looking at that a regional approach. And the challenge around PIPOT not coming with any extra funding is very real. And that's something that's played into our funneling down what we do through PIPOT, and sort of boiling it down to the basic principles of has enough information been shared in order to manage risk, because otherwise, yes, we really have to work hard to manage demand with the resources that we have. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. Okay. Any other comments? Oh, we've got something in the chat. Let's have a quick look. Here we go. Is the North Somerset link working for other people? I can have a look, Anne, in a moment, and if not, I will. I can repost it again, and see if it's.
There's just a slight error in the link. It's got an N before the HTTPS.
Let me just.
Not coming up there.
Is it not? I will.
No, hold on, Liz. I'll repost it a second.
Thanks, James. Thank you.
Okay. Let's try this one.
Thank you. Any other? Thank you, James. And I'll change it on the slides for everyone. Luke is asking, is there a national PIPOT e-learning? Don't believe there is.
No, I doubt there would be.
I'm aware of. No. Sorry, Luke.
Good question though, Luke. It sounds like it's something that might be helpful. James, I'm just wondering, and we have got a bit of time. I know we weren't going to go into section 42 and confuse things, but I do just wonder whether it might just be worth. I don't want to put you on the spot, but whether
no, absolutely. I'll tell you what I could do. Just thinking about the difference between section 42 and PIPOT.
Yes.
So what we're talking about is concerns around people who work or volunteer in positions of trust. As you can imagine, a very significant chunk of the safeguarding concerns that we have come into the council, standard safeguarding concerns, relate to the actions or behaviours of people in a position of trust. If we think about that very simply, medication errors, manual handling concerns, pressure care, all relate, if you like, to the behaviour of a person in a position of trust. The difference is that those actions or behaviours are directed towards a person with care and support needs. They're directed towards a person who would be considered to be an adult at risk under section 42 of the Care Act. So in those cases, we have an established process. We have Section 42 inquiries that will look in to those behaviours. PIPOT stands aside from that because it relates to behaviours that don't directly impact an adult at risk. So a nurse might have been admitted to A&E several times recently with alcohol poisoning. A support worker might be caught doing 120 miles an hour with 3 children in the car. So they're not allegations of abuse of an adult at risk. They are concerns that indicate that there's some questions to be asked about that person's suitability. Does that make sense? I give a kind of a clear distinction.
Yeah, no, that's helpful, James. Thank you. I don't know if has anyone got any questions about that, or any reflections or experience.
Another question that we had when we were writing the policy, and Ruth will remember this because you were a key person, weren't you, Ruth? Really, was role of the police. We were asked. Actually, our police colleagues came back to us and said, "Do you know how many complaints we get about police officers? And would you really and reasonably expect us to raise these as a person in a position of trust concerns?" So we gave the position around police that actually their role is not specifically about working with adults at risk. The police role is to work with the entire community, some members of which may have care and support needs, but actually their role is not dedicated to working with adults at risk. So that maybe as a principle is kind of helpful to reflect on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Liz, I've just popped another link in. I'm hoping that that one works for North Somerset's policy.
It does. Thank you, Ruth. No, that's really helpful, James. Thank you. I think it's just really, it's interesting to just think of it like that.
Yeah, good.
Okay. Well, what I'll do is we'll stay here for a little bit. We'll stay here for sort of 5 minutes. If anybody does want to sort of hang around and ask any questions, then please feel free. James, Ruth and I will be here. But if not, and you want to crack on with your day, then thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully it's been helpful. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
All right,
Enjoy the
thanks,
rest of your
everyone.
day.
Thank you.